Ever get that feeling like, like a song you used to love just sort of fades away? Like it's still there on your playlist, but you just never actually hit play. That's kind of what democratic backsliding is. A slow, almost unnoticed decline of democracy. And, well, let's face it, the state of American democracy has a lot of us feeling a bit, well, uneasy, to say the least. We're diving into some excerpts and key talking points on this today, just for you.
Yeah, it can be a little unsettling. I mean, we tend to think of threats to democracy as these like big dramatic coups,
Hmm.
you know, but backsliding, it's more like a slow leak. You might not even notice it's happening until, until the damage is already done.
So less Michael Bay movie and more like a termite infestation. Not exactly comforting. But before we spiral into a full-blown panic attack, let's try to understand what we're actually dealing with here. How do experts even define something as slippery as backsliding?
Well, that's where political scientists, folks like Levitsky and Ziblatt, they come in. They've identified 4 key warning signs. And they're all about this like subtle chipping away at democratic foundations from within.
Okay, I'm all ears. Hit me with those warning signs.
So first, you see a rejection of the rules of the game. Think refusing to accept election results or constantly trying to, bend the rules in your favor.
Hmm. Okay, so not just your typical political disagreements. This is getting a little intense.
Yeah, it definitely can be, and it gets worse. The second indicator is a denial of the legitimacy of your opponents. Basically saying they're not just wrong, they're dangerous, they're illegitimate.
Oh, wow. Okay, what else?
The third one is a tolerance or even encouragement of violence. It could be anything from, subtle threats to outright attacks on political opponents.
Okay, yeah, that's not good. All right, what's the fourth sign?
The fourth and final sign is a willingness to curtail civil liberties, even those of your opponents. Things like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the bedrock of a functioning democracy.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty chilling. And unfortunately, it's not just hypothetical, right? I mean, the excerpts we're looking at today actually bring up some pretty uncomfortable parallels in recent American politics.
Exactly. Think back to the 2016 election and the events that, well, culminated in the January 6th Capitol riot. A lot of experts point to those as flashing red lights on the Democratic dashboard, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's refusal to accept the election results, the rhetoric questioning the legitimacy of the process, and then the eruption of violence. Those feel like they check a lot of the boxes we just talked about.
Yeah, they do. And while the U.S. obviously has a strong democratic foundation, these events, they serve as a stark reminder that no democracy is immune to backsliding. And it's not a new phenomenon either. History is, well, full of examples, and they offer some valuable, if somewhat grim, lessons.
Well, the one that immediately comes to mind is Hitler's rise in 1930s Germany. He didn't just, barge in with guns blazing. It was a slow, calculated dismantling of democratic institutions, often using legal means to achieve deeply undemocratic ends.
Precisely. And for a more recent example, you could look at Viktor Orban's Hungary. He's systematically consolidated power, eroded judicial independence, restricted media freedoms, and he's done all of it while operating within the framework of the Hungarian constitution.
So it's not just about, dictatorships. It's about manipulating the system from within, using the tools of democracy to basically, well, kill it. It's kind of sneaky when you think about it.
It is. And one of the most fascinating insights from our source material comes from Drutman. He argues that modern backsliding often starts by exploiting legal loopholes or by twisting executive powers.
Wait, so you're saying it's like someone figuring out how to use the rules of a game to actually break the game itself, like finding some weird glitch in the code of democracy?
But that's a great way to put it. Think about controversies over, packing courts with loyal judges or presidents bypassing Congress with executive orders. Those are exactly the kinds of tactics that Drutman is warning us about.
Okay, so that brings us to the million-dollar question. And after everything we've just talked about, I gotta admit it's one that's been keeping me up at night. Is America truly at risk? Like, really, truly at risk?
It's a debate that's raging on among political scientists. There's no, easy answer. But the warning signs we just discussed, along with recent events, they've got a lot of experts raising eyebrows, to say the least.
All right, I think we all need to take a deep breath here. I know this whole conversation about backsliding can be a little, well, overwhelming, but I think it's good to remember that we're having this conversation so that we can actually do something about it, right? Awareness is the first step, or so they say.
Absolutely. Understanding the problem is, well, it's crucial if we want to find solutions.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's say, hypothetically, that we all agree that American democracy is facing some real challenges, some real threats. What can we actually do about it? Are there any concrete steps we can take to, I don't know, shore up the foundation before the whole house comes crumbling down?
There are. And the good news is, a lot of the solutions are actually things that we as citizens, we can directly influence.
Okay, well, that's a relief. Lay it on me. What can we do?
Well, the first and probably the most obvious is, well, strengthening voting rights. That's, it's absolutely fundamental to a healthy democracy. We got to make sure that everyone who's eligible to vote can actually vote easily and without, unnecessary barriers.
So things like making registration easier, expanding access to early and mail-in voting, making sure polling places are accessible, convenient for everyone.
Exactly. And this is one area where we as citizens can really, make a difference. We can advocate for these changes, contact our elected officials, support organizations that are, that are working to protect voting rights.
Got it. Vote and make sure everyone else can vote too. What else you got?
Another crucial area is protecting the independence of our judiciary. The courts, they play a vital role in upholding the rule of law and safeguarding our democratic institutions.
Okay, remind me. What does judicial independence actually mean? It sounds important, but I'm not sure I fully get it.
Basically, it means ensuring that judges can make decisions based on the law and the Constitution without being swayed by, political pressure or outside influence. It's about protecting their ability to act as impartial referees, even when powerful people or, popular opinions might disagree with their rulings.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. It's like, we lead referees who call the game fairly, even if it means, making an unpopular call, upsetting some fans.
Precisely. And there are a number of things we can do to support judicial independence. We can resist efforts to, for example, pack courts with judges who are chosen based on their political ideology rather than their qualifications, and their commitment to impartiality.
So it's about pushing back against those us versus them dynamics that we were talking about earlier. Make sure that the courts aren't just another, battleground for political point scoring.
Exactly. And we can also advocate for, reforms that strengthen ethical standards for judges and protect them from, undue influence.
Got it. Okay. Support voting rights, protect the independence of the judiciary. I'm taking notes here. Anything else?
Well, this one might seem a little less obvious, but it's absolutely crucial in today's world. We need to become more media literate and promote, civic education. We're bombarded with information from so many sources these days. It's more important than ever to be able to critically evaluate what we're seeing and hearing.
Oh, you mean like, all the misinformation and fake news that's flying around? I feel like it's gotten so hard to tell what's real and what's not.
It's like trying to, I don't know, drink from a fire hose of information. And half of it is, contaminated. We need to develop those critical thinking skills to filter out the noise, identify bias, separate fact from fiction.
So it's not just about, knowing stuff. It's about knowing how to think about stuff. Okay, that makes sense. But how do we do that? It just feels like such a massive problem.
It is a challenge, but there are things we can do. We can support organizations that are promoting media literacy, fact-checking initiatives. We can encourage schools to teach critical thinking skills and media literacy as part of their curriculum.
Right. Yeah. Start them young.
Yeah.
Right. If we can teach kids how to spot BS early on, maybe they'll be less likely to fall for it when they're, grown-ups. What a world that would be.
And don't underestimate the power of just, having these conversations in your own circles too. Talk to your friends and family about the importance of media literacy. Share reliable sources of information.
Yeah, be the change you want to see, right?
I got it. It's interesting. One of the sources we're looking at today, Aziz Rana's book, Goodbye Cold War, he makes a really compelling argument about this whole issue of backsliding.
Oh, tell me more. What does he say?
Well, Rana argues that one of the major factors contributing to backsliding is the historical failure of the American political system to, truly represent all of his people. He points out that marginalized groups have often been excluded from, full participation in democratic processes.
You mean things like voter suppression efforts that disproportionately target, minority communities, or the fact that certain groups have historically been denied, equal access to education and housing and economic opportunities.
Exactly. Rana argues that when large segments of the population feel like the system isn't working for them, they lose faith in democracy itself. And that makes them more susceptible to the appeals of those who promise, quick fixes, easy solutions, even if those solutions come at the expense of, democratic norms and values.
That's a really good point. It's like, If you've been locked out of the game for so long, you're more likely to question the rules of the game, right? You might even be tempted to join someone who's promising to just overturn the game board entirely, even if it means chaos for everyone.
Precisely. And this brings us back to those four warning signs of backsliding that we talked about earlier. When people feel like the system is rigged against them, they're more likely to tolerate or even embrace the erosion of those democratic norms that we've been discussing.
So it's not just about protecting democracy from outside threats. It's about making sure that democracy actually works for everyone, that it delivers on its promises of equality and justice, for all.
Exactly. And that requires a constant effort to address those systemic inequalities that exist, to ensure that everyone has a voice and that all those voices are heard.
Okay, so we've got a lot on our plates. Strengthening voting rights, protecting the judiciary, promoting media literacy and civic education, and addressing systemic inequalities. That's a lot to tackle.
It is, but remember, we're not alone in this. There are countless organizations and individuals who are, working tirelessly to protect and strengthen our democracy.
Right. And every little bit helps. It's like that saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing, or something like that. Point being, we can't just sit around and wait for, someone else to save the day. We all have a role to play in this.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us back to you, dear listener. We've explored the concept of democratic backsliding. We've examined historical and contemporary examples. We've discussed potential solutions. But now it's time for you to take this knowledge and apply it to your own life.
So let's all just pause for a moment and consider this. What resonates with you most from what we've discussed so far? What aspects of backsliding are you most concerned about?
And more importantly, what actions can you take to protect and strengthen our democracy? Remember, even small actions multiplied by, millions of engaged citizens can have a tremendous impact.
Wow, it is a lot to think about, isn't it? I mean, this whole idea that democracy isn't like, a finish line. It's more like, well, a constant uphill climb. But, maybe that's what makes it so valuable. It requires our active participation, our vigilance. It's definitely not a spectator sport.
That's a good point. It's easy to just feel kind of overwhelmed, like the problems are too big,
Yeah.
for any one person to really tackle. But that's the beauty of democracy, right? It's built on that collective action of, everyday citizens.
Right. So let's talk about what that action actually looks like. What are some like tangible things that people can actually do? Because I think a lot of folks listening are probably thinking like, okay, I get it. Democracy is, it's fragile, but where do we even begin?
Right. Well, sometimes the simplest actions can be the most powerful. Like staying informed is a great place to start. Just, read widely, be critical of your sources, and engage in those, thoughtful conversations, even with people who hold different viewpoints.
I like that. Before you go out and try to change the world, maybe start by, understanding it. Educate yourself, be curious, ask questions.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's voting. I know it might seem obvious, but it is like the foundation of any democracy. Make sure you're registered, know the issues, and show up at the polls. Every vote matters.
Okay, vote, check. What else? Because, I'm feeling pretty fired up, and I think our listeners are too. Give us some more ways to channel this energy.
Well, think about, what are the issues that really resonate with you the most, from our conversation? Is it voting rights? Is it protecting the judiciary? Combating misinformation? Find an organization that's working on those issues and get involved.
Right. Put your money where your mouth is, donate, volunteer, spread the word. And I bet there are tons of, amazing groups out there that are doing this work at the local level, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the power of local politics. Attend those city council meetings, contact your state representatives, get involved in, community initiatives. These are the places where you can, often have the most direct impact.
This is making me realize how much I've just taken, democracy for granted. It's like I've been coasting along thinking, oh, someone else will take care of it. But it's on all of us, isn't it?
It is. And it's a responsibility that we should, embrace. Think about it this way. Democracy is like, I don't know, like a garden. It requires constant tending, nurturing, and protection from threats. Yeah. If we neglect it, it withers and dies.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy. And it makes me think, what kind of gardener do I want to be? Someone who just, admires the flowers from afar, or someone who gets their hands dirty, pulls out the weeds, helps the garden flourish.
I mean, we all have different skills, and capacities, but we can all find ways to contribute. Maybe you're the type of person who loves to write letters to their representatives, or maybe you're, a social media whiz who can spread awareness, or maybe you're, a community organizer who can bring people together.
I love it. Find your lane and make a difference. Who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire someone who's listening to, I don't know, to run for office themselves someday.
I wouldn't be surprised. The point is, we all have a role to play in safeguarding our democracy. And it starts with, understanding the challenges, engaging in thoughtful dialogue, and then taking action.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this. We've talked a lot about the potential pitfalls, the warning signs, the threats. But remember, there's immense hope too.
There is. Democracy's strength lies in its ability to, adapt, to evolve, to correct course when necessary. And that power rests in the hands of, the people.
So keep learning, keep questioning, keep engaging. Don't be afraid to, to speak up, to challenge the status quo, to demand better from our leaders and from ourselves.
Because, in the end, the fate of American democracy doesn't just rest on institutions. It rests on a culture that, that values those democratic principles.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts with each and every one of us.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Well, that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored this crucial topic. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep thinking, keep discussing, and keep those gardener gloves handy because democracy, it needs all of us to tend to its garden.